I help people commit suicide, but they have to convince me to do it first. I am a little nervous writing up this case for reasons you will come to understand as you read. This is a certain kind of case that has been requested quite frequently, so I hope it lives up to expectation. I worry that there will be some disagreement among readers regarding this client, but it makes for an interesting tale at the very least. I met with this woman about 4 months ago. When I first laid eyes on her, I immediately noticed a large, mangled scar that spread across one shoulder. Out of respect, I did not allow my gaze to linger on the area for long. She offered a small smile when I greeted her, but I observed a profound sadness behind her eyes. "Go ahead and take a seat on the couch over there," I directed, waving to the area. "You can leave your things there as well." The woman followed my request, falling backwards onto the sofa. I trailed after her and perched on my own chair directly across from her. "Ma'am, did you bring payment?" She nodded, rustling through a disorganized bag muddled with receipts and other miscellaneous items. The woman located a bundle of cash among its contents and leaned forward to pass it to me. I thanked her for the payment before continuing. "Whenever you're ready, ma'am, you may begin your story." "This is going to sound crazy," the woman warned, folding her hands in her lap. "But, I can smell death." I cocked my head to one side, evaluating this assertion. "What do you mean?" The woman snickered at my reaction. "I mean exactly what I said. One morning when I was just a young child, I sensed a soft, sweet smell. The faint smell of vanilla, but with a burnt element to it. It grew in intensity over the following days, and I realized that the scent strength would magnify in the presence of my parents, and wane in their absence. It was the most pleasant smell. I would burrow my face in their necks when we hugged just to get more of it," she reminisced fondly. One evening, they left for a date and the scent had become overwhelming, developing into a sickly saccharine yet bitter aroma I can only liken to burning molasses. "What happened that night?" I questioned, shifting in my seat. Her gaze dropped to the floor. As they walked back to their car following their date, they were attacked. The police were never able to figure out exactly what happened, but they were both shot and killed that night. "I'm so sorry, ma'am, that must have been awful for you," I expressed, furrowing my brow in concern. She nodded solemnly. "It was. The smell dissipated after their death. From then on, I understood what it meant. The scent came back to me in the days before each of my grandparents passed, and it has cropped up before every other death I've experienced. I always know," she breathed, "and it's torture." I crossed my legs and gestured for her to continue. "The smell resurfaced approximately a year ago, both startling and terrifying me when I discovered its source. It was wafting off of my husband and 2 young daughters," she explained, shaking her head sluggishly in disbelief. "My husband didn't know of my unfortunate ability, but I begged him hysterically to cancel the trip he was planning to take with our girls to visit his parents. I thought that was clearly the source of the danger." "Did they stay home?" I inquired. A half-hearted smile spread across her features. My husband was clearly confused and concerned, but he did as I asked. I had never attempted to interfere with the development of the smell, the natural course of events, but it worked. As I flicked on the television the following morning, I was alarmed to see a news segment detailing a major car accident on the very route my family would have taken. My family came downstairs moments later, and thank God, the scent was gone, the woman declared. I lifted one eyebrow quizzically. "Something tells me that's not the end of your tale." "Smart girl," she muttered, tucking a strand of raven hair behind one ear. "Sure, the smell was gone, but it came back. Again and again, no matter what measures I took to stop it. Each time I thought it had subsided for good, it would just come back again a day or so later. An uncontrollable sense of dread and paranoia overtook me entirely. My husband was a stay-at-home parent, and I pleaded with him to remain indoors with the girls at all times, to keep them safe. Eventually, I enforced this as a rule, essentially locking them away. I couldn't stand to see them hurt, or worse, she ranted, tears beginning to form in her dark eyes. Did it work? I asked cautiously, although I already knew the answer. No, it didn't. They're all dead, now, the woman replied with an exaggerated sigh. She dropped her head and cried for a few minutes. I brought one of my hands to my face, one curled finger obstructing my mouth as she sobbed. The details are fuzzy. PTSD, my therapist says. The smell had taken on that burning molasses quality. Naturally, I panicked and rushed to find my family. I came upon my husband in the bathroom, finishing the girls' bath. It took me a moment to fully comprehend what I was seeing. My girls, they laid dead in the tub, drowned. I screeched, "What have you done? How could you do this?" I pulled one of my girls from the basin, but I knew they were gone as soon as my hands hit the water. It was cold, she divulged with an audible shiver, as if her hands were still submerged in the frigid water. Nevertheless, I tried to revive her. I attempted CPR, the sound of her sternum cracking was horrific. Tears continued to flow freely from her eyes. I didn't know what to say. There wasn't really anything appropriate to say. I'm so sorry, ma'am. She dismissed my words with the wave of a hand. I didn't even realize my husband had left the room until he returned with the gun. He aimed and shot. I fell backwards. And then he stuffed the muzzle of the gun in his mouth and fired, she continued, sniffling. Unfortunately, I survived. The bullet lodged in my shoulder. When police arrived on the scene, they found my girls and husband dead, and he was soaked in water. She gestured to the massive scar that spread across the proximal end of her left upper arm. Physically, I recovered quite well, although I have lost a lot of strength and sensation in this arm. Emotionally, well, that's a different story. I was left wondering if it had simply been their fate to pass that day and intervening only postponed it, or if maybe I had driven my husband mad with my behavior. You mentioned a therapist? I recalled. Yes, I was diagnosed with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, soon after. I began to suffer from agonizing flashbacks, particularly in that bathroom. This eventually developed into a severe phobia of the bathtub, she revealed, picking at a fingernail. She wiped the tears from her eyes with a crumpled tissue from her purse. I worked with my therapist extensively on cultivating coping mechanisms, and eventually exposure therapy to tackle this strange phobia. She paused momentarily before clarifying, that is, introducing myself to the fear-inducing stimulus, the bathtub, in baby steps. We started just by talking about it, then looking at pictures, finally leading up to actually bathing in it like I used to enjoy so much. I leaned forward as I asked, "Oh? And how did that go?" A second cascade of tears started to drip down her face. I was able to use the techniques I had built with my therapist. I felt a deep sadness, but I also felt close to my girls, if that makes sense. It went well until I slipped underwater to rinse my hair at the conclusion of my bath like always. I felt the water swallow me whole, and I let myself just lie there for a moment, feeling calm for the first time since the traumatic event, she remarked, discarding her soiled tissue into her purse before retrieving a new one. When I tried to surface, an unknown force held me underneath. My eyes shot open, and I saw the most horrifying thing. What was it? I urged. It was me, she sniveled, meeting my gaze. I saw myself with arms outstretched to prevent me from surfacing, eyes widened in a dead stare. I thought I was going to drown, but as I began to lose consciousness, or guess I let go, the woman recounted. I burst out of the water, hacking and couching. The water in the tub immediately ran cold. I discovered, to my horror, that I was not alone in there. The decaying, bloated corpses of my daughters were floating alongside me. She choked through tears. They were practically crumbling, some of their limbs already detached and bobbing atop the chilled water, mixing with liquefied fat. Their eyes had disintegrated entirely, running and dripping out of the sockets. The sticky sweet smell of burnt molasses assaulted my nostrils. My stomach dropped. I felt like I was going to be sick. The woman blew her nose and composed herself enough to continue, although still weeping heavily. From there, the flashback played out almost like a movie before my eyes, vividly animated unlike they'd ever been previously. I observed other me exit the room calmly, calling down the stairway, "Look what I've done, honey," she explained with the last bit in a disturbing sing-song voice. After that, I heard someone barrel up the stairs, the heavy steps of my husband. The woman whimpered, holding her hands in fists so tight that her nails dug into her palms. My husband, he burst through the door, and the look on his face, those girls. They were his entire world, and they were gone. It was almost impossible for me to maintain my own composure, but I reminded myself to remain professional. "I can't even imagine what you've been through, ma'am," I reassured, my voice wavering slightly. He immediately fell to his knees and held the girls to his chest in the tub, embracing them one last time. Their putrefying corpses sputtered and oozed various gases and liquids of decay. I vomited into the tub, but my husband paid me no mind, she muttered, releasing one fist to support her forehead with the space between an outstretched thumb and index finger. And that's when everything started to look familiar. I gritted my teeth against the tears I suspected might come. What looked familiar? She emitted an indignant laugh. The flashbacks I'd had previously, they weren't wrong, they were just delayed. I watched other me erupt through the door, the moment of realization as sheer terror passed over her face, the grief-stricken shrieking. "What have you done?" she howled, as she yanked one of the corpses out of the basin. She attempted to perform CPR, but the real me, had already broken her sternum on that fateful day, and my girl's body was softened with rot. Her hands, they just sunk right through, then re-emerged coated in brackish muck. She lamented, eyes inflamed and reddened. Little did she know, I know, she'd done it all along. I'd done it all along. Her voice was barely more than a whisper. I let out a long breath, bracing myself for the rest of her tale. This time, I did notice my husband exit the room, returning with our gun. The gun we bought to protect ourselves, our family. I studied the scene as he pointed the weapon at me, first directly at my chest, then off to the side. She remarked with a tearful sigh. It was then that I realized, he didn't want to kill me. He wanted to hurt me, he wanted me to live with this. He wanted me to know what I'd done, the woman sobbed, pulling the neck of her top up to wipe her tears. I feel so absurd for having ever thought otherwise. My husband, a family annihilator? No, it doesn't make sense. Our girls were everything to him. To me, too, but he lived for them, and only them. I already knew the answer, but I asked anyway. Why are you here today? The woman laughed in spite of herself through her weeping. Because, I killed my babies. Destroyed my husband. I want you to know that I had no inkling that I had hurt them until now, and I can't stand to live a moment longer knowing what I've done. I don't deserve to live either, she explained. She paused briefly, then firmed her tone to add, Miss, I don't want you to think that I'm trying to evade responsibility entirely. I've written a note confessing to the wretched thing I've done. It's in my bag. Please leave it with my body. You have to believe me. I didn't know what I was doing, she implored, lacing her hands together tightly and holding them over her reddened face. Weighing my options, I nodded slowly. I believe you. I'll help you. Thank you, she sighed through tears. I knew you would help me since the moment I entered this place and picked up on that slight sweet scent of vanilla. The scent has only been growing throughout our talk. It's overwhelming now, and for the first time since I was a little girl, I'm happy that it's here. Please lie down, ma'am. I'm going to prepare the injection, I instructed as I sprung out of my chair to do just that. I have been asked to write about a case involving an ethical gray area, and this is certainly one of them. The answer here was not clear-cut, leaving me to rely more on intuition. I understand that not all of you will agree with my judgment with this client. After all, she killed her children, but you were not there listening to her story. You could not sense her grief, her confusion, her guilt. Growing up autistic, I've had to study the behavior of other people in order to understand their intentions. Years of doing this has given me a sort of hyper-awareness of any change in tone or body language and what these changes might mean. However, her last words were truly what solidified the validity of the decision in my mind. Please, miss, you make damn sure they cremate me, she cried as I steadied the needle against her skin. I deserve to go to hell.